4 semesters. And I've always looked out at that lake. I love looking at it. I love the water. I grew up on the Chesapeake Bay. I spent every summer swimming, fishing, crabbing, and boating. I spent close to half my life working on the water in the Coast Guard. And working on the water and being around it, I've learned a few things. While it can look fun and inviting, refreshing, calm and safe, it can actually be deadly. If you take a second and look at the lake right now, it's nice and flat and calm. But if you weren't from around here, you would never know that there's alligators in there, snapping turtles, poisonous snakes, and that stuff can kill you. One of the deadliest sections of river in the world is called the Strid on the River Wharfe in England. It's only about this wide, but if you fall in, it's going to kill you. No one has ever survived that has fallen in. And there's a lot of things on the surface that look good. They look perfectly fine and harmless, but when you dig a little bit deeper, or you slip in, you realize that there's nothing but death. In the same way, things that look bad on the surface can turn out amazing. Jesus' death seemed like the end, but it was actually a beginning and turned out to be the greatest gift that God could have given us. Jesus talks about looking beneath the surface in chapter 7, verse 24. He was getting grief from the Pharisees because he had healed a person on the Sabbath. And he was asking, why can't I heal a whole man when you follow Moses' law on the Sabbath? And Jesus said in verse 24, he said, look beneath the surface so you can judge correctly. God doesn't care about how many things you do, he cares about your motivation. My little brother was going through a hard time in a relationship, and he couldn't understand why his girlfriend never complimented on any of the good things he did. So I sat down and talked to him. I was like, why are you helping her? I'm like, you just want to help her because you're nice and you want to do good things for her, or you're trying to get something out of it? And while we were talking, I was able to get out of him that the only reason he was helping her was because he wanted her to tell everyone around her that he was a great guy. His motivation was he wanted something in return. The root of his motivation was in the wrong place. He was trying to get something out of it. He wanted earthly praise. One of the best leaders I ever worked for didn't care about getting approval or praise from anyone. He was more concerned about the people in his shop getting the recognition. His motivation was to make his people look good. There was this one time we were working on a boat and couldn't fix it. We'd spent days troubleshooting it, and he shows up in 5 minutes and fixes it. The commanding officer came over a few minutes later and said, hey, Chief, thanks for fixing our boat. And he goes, that wasn't me, it was Josh. I'm just here for the free coffee. And we were riding back to the shop, and I was like, why did you do that? Because it didn't make sense to me at the time. And he goes, my job is to make you guys look good. I don't care what anyone else thinks about me. So as we're finishing school and moving into new positions, we have to be careful to keep our hearts and motivation in the right place. We have to make sure our focus is on God and we need to be careful not to fall into traps that could cause someone to fall away from God or for us to lose our ministry. I never want to be the reason a person doesn't come to the Lord. Now, we've all heard stories about pastors failing over and over again. I was just reading the other day that between 12 and 40% of pastors have had an affair. This number should be 0, to be honest. I've always tried to carry myself to a higher level being in the military, and now that I'm moving into ministry, it needs to be even higher, and so do you guys. Need to be at that higher level. Statistically, someone in this room is going to have an inappropriate relationship during their ministry. Yeah. We have to be the group that changes this pattern. We can't keep this. This can't keep happening. It has to change. Each of us needs to take a look below the surface and make sure our motivation brings us to God. Our motivation brings glory to God and not to us. So, thank you.